Jose Vasconcelos, a Mexican like intellectual, like 100 years ago after the Mexican Revolution, like came up with this completely batshit insane idea to mix all the races together to make the master race. And he called it the cosmic race. This was like in the context of like Mexico dealing with like US imperialism and stuff, etc. And his idea was like, you know, the Anglos like paint themselves as superior because they don't miscegenate. We're the pure white race, blah, 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 as their eugenics of the time dictated. So he decided to basically like take the idea of eugenics and like the idea of race at face value. He never even thought to question the idea of race in the first place. Like most people really don't. Most people just think it's like a fact of life, right? They never really ask, does race really have any validity to it? Why do we group people in this way? Where did it come from? Who came up with that idea, you know? And he didn't ask those questions. And he kind of took eugenics at face value. But instead of being like, it's better for us to keep our superior race pure by not mixing with the other lesser races, as the Anglo-eugenicists to his north at the time were saying at the time, in which they use a lot against Mexicans to justify them being inferior. He was like, okay, well, yeah, eugenics is real, race is real, but the real eugenics is that you mix everyone together and then you get the best race, the cosmic race, the final evolution of humanity. So it was like reverse eugenics, like using the logic of eugenics against the people who had invented it. And that's like a fantastic example of like how the problems with like taking the idea of race at face value is that you end up like seeing racism as a problem to be solved while somehow still trying to like
communism is based
uphold the idea that races exist when they don't. So like for his time, that was an incredibly like progressive idea, right? Like let's all miscegenate. Miscegenation is good. It was very racist too. Like obviously, like he was like all the races have a positive trait. And if they don't mix together, then their offspring will be missing out on those positive traits. And the positive trait that he listed for Asians, for example, he said that the positive trait for Asians was that their eyes were smaller so they could see finer details better. And like his positive trait for blacks was that they were like the best at partying. So, you know, it was like progressive in a sort of 1925 racist eugenicist way. He basically took like the racial stereotypes of his time and said, actually, those things are good, and we should try to like include them in our ideal, like selectively bred humans. And I think it's a good example of like a lot of things, really, like not just with like taking the framing, the dominant like hegemonic framing in general at face value, but especially like taking the concept of race at face value. But I mean, like, if you guys had lived in like 1925, before anyone had really thought like, hey, is race really real or not? Like most people didn't even think that back then. Not even like black people did, or at least most of them. It really came a bit later than that. So most of us, if we lived at the time, we probably would have thought that too, right? We probably would have thought that races exist. And that's still how most people think today. They take the idea of race at face value. And it's like, the problem isn't the concept of race itself. The problem is just racism. Like if we got people to stop thinking that other races were inferior or superior or whatever, or stereotypes about them or whatever, things would be okay. But that's obviously never going to happen because the problem is race in the first place, because it's grouping people into these arbitrary categories that causes the issue. So it was like a sort of like, I guess, ambivalent, like misguided sort of way of looking at things. The only way that race is real today is because people believe that it's real, and because they believe that it's real, it has power. It doesn't have like innate power. It doesn't have like specific scientific relevance. It's not any better of a way of grouping people together than like through other traits or other ways. Like nationality, for example, tends to be a much more coherent way of grouping people, for finding like commonalities between them, etc.